Meteorologist Jacob Morse is here. You're continuing your series on severe weather warnings. What do you got today?
So we talked about how the National Weather Service, meteorologists also issue watches, warnings to get the message out about incoming severe weather. But what happens after that severe weather strikes? Well, the National Weather Service meteorologists need to go out on damage surveys in order to assess the damage and determine if it was a high-end wind event or a tornado that caused the damage. So they get tipped off that there was damage at a certain location from emergency management, from law enforcement, from the public. Sometimes we relay information to the Weather Service that there was damage at a certain location. They'll drive to that point and interview people at the scene to see what happened. Here's JP Martin going over some of the specifics with damage surveys.
The first thing we have to determine is how intense the storm was, what type of damage was done, were there any injuries or deaths. Now, if there were any deaths or injuries, we're going to go out and damage survey to determine, was it wind, high wind that did the damage, or was it a tornado? That's what's very important, is to get out there as soon as we can before anything is disturbed, right? We want the evidence to be what it was before anybody moved anything, to help us determine, was it wind that did the damage or was it a tornado? It's a challenge, right? Because I'm trying to talk to you about your experience during this event that has now turned your life upside down. Maybe no one was injured or no one was killed, but your home is severely damaged, or your farm, your property. And here I am trying to talk with you about your experience. So it can be a big challenge to do that. It's why we now want to take two people. We want to have a team approach to this, so that I could be talking to a person and not stopping to write notes down, but have someone with me to take those notes for me.
So not only has the team approach changed with how they conduct those damage surveys, but also the technology and the materials that they bring along with them on the damage surveys.
We still take a bucket with us with all these things in there. We still do that just in case, because we want to write notes down. We may need to look at a map or something like that, because parts of North Dakota, internet access is lacking and we're not able to use the software that we have on an iPad. But today we take an iPad with us and use that software on there, a program that accounts for all these things you see here on the table.
So that technology allows them to plot the GPS coordinates exactly where the damage occurred. At each one of those points where damage occurred, they'll assess based on a damage indicator. There's a list of 28 damage indicators ranging from trees to buildings to schoolhouses to outbuildings, farm buildings, etc. A whole list here of different things that they can assess and determine how severely it was damaged. That's called the degree of damage. All of this is then used to assess how strong or severe that tornado or high-end wind event was.
So we have all these different damage indicators, and then once we find our damage indicator, a pole, a light pole, a tree, was it a softwood tree or a hardwood tree? Once we determine that damage indicator, then we look for, well, how badly was this thing damaged? And that's what takes us up on the scale. We have 28 damage indicators to look at. And it has not expanded since it began in about 2007. But we, the National Weather Service office in Bismarck, we're pushing for more damage indicators, especially on farms. You know, farm equipment, a pivotal irrigation system, things like that are not included. So then when something happens to that pivotal irrigation system, it's not one of our damage indicators that we can really assess.
Again, they're looking for a pattern of damage to assess, was it straight line winds or was it a tornado that caused the damage. With tornadoes, you usually see a bit more of a circular pattern with the damage versus with a high-end wind event. All the debris is usually pushed towards one direction, or at least in a divergent pattern. And again, they're using the debris and the damage to assess the severity of the storm after the event happens. And with tornadoes, it's put on an EF rating, the Enhanced Fujita scale, from 0 with 65 to 85 mile per hour winds to the strongest tornado, EF5, with 200 plus mile per hour winds. And the damage, of course, increases in severity as you go up the EF scale.
So we have to be careful when we assume, oh, this had to be a tornado. We hear that a lot. When I go to a damage survey, when I go to survey the damage, in my mind is not that this was a tornado and I want to disprove that. in my mind is this was not a tornado, and now I need the evidence to change my mind to say it was. What we do for tornadoes, we look for circular patterns through a field, through a tree row. We look for debris, things that were destroyed by the event. We look for debris back the way the event came from, because wind will not blow stuff a half a mile back, right? But a tornado will.
Some notable surveys that JP mentioned that he's done throughout his career was in 2009, the 789 tornado, which was an EF3 strength in Dickinson. And then in 2018, there was an EF2 tornado that struck Watford City. Now, over the past couple of years, the Weather Service in Bismarck hasn't done many damage surveys in western or central North Dakota. This year, however, they've gone on a couple. One was just at the beginning of the month, August 1st, in the Beulah Bay, Hazen Bay area, where they determined, based on going to that site, talking with eyewitnesses, and seeing how the damage was strewn out in kind of a divergent pattern, that was wind damage between 80 and 95 miles per hour. And also on August 1st in Wilton, there was an EF unknown tornado that was surveyed by the Weather Service, meaning it didn't strike any structures or there weren't any damage indicators that the tornado impacted, so therefore they can't assess the rating of the tornado. It was likely a brief and weak tornado, however. So we'll talk about all those different damage indicators and what the Weather Service has done over the years here with JP.
In that case, it was wind, but we used the damage indicator from a tornado and wind speeds associated with that. We use that to then determine, even if it was not a tornado, to determine, well, how high was the wind associated with this event. Then we look at just how badly was it damaged? Well, it was completely destroyed. Was it strapped down or not? Those things would add to, well, was it 115 miles an hour, 120, 130? What was it in that EF2 range? And we decided about the middle of the road for that home. About 125 miles an hour was an appropriate number to put on. In this case, we determined that it was divergent, oriented toward the east-southeast, and so again, that led to our determination that this was wind damage and not a tornado. Had the debris been converging, coming together downstream, we would have probably had a different determination that this would have been a tornado.
So JP and the video there was referring to the Sioux County high-end wind event that happened in June of this year. So what happens if you encounter or are dealing with severe thunderstorm or tornado damage? What should you do?
Immediately, you should notify their county emergency manager or tribal emergency manager and let them know about the damage they have. And then say, hey, by the way, can you call the National Weather Service? Because a lot of things happen that we're unaware of. You know, we suspect there had to be damage from this thunderstorm, and yet we don't hear about it. And who do we call, you know, to try and find out? Well, we call an emergency manager. Sometimes they don't know about it either.
And sometimes you need to be patient with the Weather Service because it can take a couple of days for them to go out and assess damage, especially if severe thunderstorms struck multiple locations. But it's a process that involves engineering knowledge as well as meteorological knowledge to get that rating for a tornado or the severity for wind speeds.
Wow, okay, good stuff.